Hello everyone, in this video we are going to solve examples about cosine and sine function. So if you remember, in the previous videos we learned the sine function and we learned the cosine function. Alright, let's start with this example. Show that cosine squared of alpha plus sine squared of alpha is equal to 1. Alright, so let's draw our unit circle first. Alright, so this is our unit circle, and on the unit circle, if we choose a point, for example, any point, let's say this point. So the coordinates of this point must satisfy the equation x squared plus y squared is equal to 1. This is the equation of a unit circle. Right, so let me write here the equation. Okay, so this is the equation of the unit circle. So any point on the unit circle must satisfy this equation. So, for example, this point on the unit circle. If you remember the definition of sine function and cosine function, let's have this angle. Let's say this is alpha. So what is sine of alpha? The sine of alpha is the y coordinate of this point. So this is going to be sine of alpha. And the x coordinate of this point is going to be, so this point is going to be cosine of alpha. So I can write the coordinates of this point as, first we write the x coordinate. What's the x coordinate of this point? It is cosine of alpha. Comma, what is the y coordinate of this point? It is sine of alpha. Cosine of alpha, comma, sine of alpha is the coordinates of this point. So now, this is the equation of the unit circle. So now I can replace x and y with these values. So instead of x, I can write the cosine of alpha, because the first number is always the x coordinate and the second number is always the y coordinate. So I can write, instead of x, I can write cosine of alpha squared plus, instead of y, I can write sine of alpha. So sine of alpha squared is equal to 1. And actually another way of showing this cosine of alpha squared, it is cosine squared of alpha plus sine squared of alpha is equal to 1. So actually we write alpha, but it is actually for any value. Okay, so let's write for any value of alpha. For example, cosine squared of 30 degrees plus sine squared of 30 degrees is equal to 1. Or you can write cosine squared of 2 pi over 5 plus sine squared of 2 pi over 5 is equal to 1. Alright, that's it. That's it for this example. The important thing is these angles must have the same measure. You cannot write cosine squared of x plus sine squared of y is equal to 1. You cannot write that. You cannot write cosine squared of 25 plus sine squared of 55 is equal to 1. It's not correct. These values must be the same. This is the next example. What is the maximum and minimum value of f of x? F of x is 2 sine of x minus 3. Let's remember this fact. Sine of x is less than or equal to 1 and greater than or equal to negative 1. So you should remember this. We have learned this before. Always, sine of any value is always between negative 1 and 1, and also may be equal to negative 1 and 1. Alright. So in order to get the maximum and minimum value of this expression, we can first get 2 sine of x first. Okay, so how can I get 2 sine of x? I have -1 sine of x and 1. I can multiply all these values by 2. So I'm multiplying by a positive number. That means we don't need to change these inequalities. I'm multiplying by a positive number. So 2 times -1 less than or equal to sine of x less than or equal to 2 times 1. So we get -2 less than or equal to sine of x less than or equal to 2. I'm sorry, we multiply all these values by 2. So we multiply this value by 2 as well. 2 times -1, -2, 2 times sine of x. 2 times sine of x, and 2 times 1 is 2. And then we subtract 3 from all the sides. I'm going to subtract 3 from this, 3 from this, and 3 from this. Alright, so it's going to be -2, -3, less than or equal to 2 times sine of x minus 3, less than or equal to 2 minus 3. So -2 minus 3 is equal to -5. Less than or equal to 2 times sine of x minus 3, 2 times sine of x minus 3, less than or equal to 2 minus 3 is -1. So the maximum value of this function is -1. So let's write maximum is -1, and the minimum value of this function is -5. So the minimum value is -5. All right, so next example. What is the maximum and minimum value of f of x 1 minus cosine of x over 3? So we are going to do the exact same thing. Whatever we have done here, we will do the same thing. We can first find the negative cosine of x. So we should remember that -1 is less than or equal to cosine of x and less than or equal to 1. So the first thing we should do is we should find negative cosine of x. So we can multiply all these values by negative number. If you multiply a negative number, you should change, actually you have to change these inequalities. So in order to get negative cosine of x, I'm going to multiply all these values by -1. So -1 times -1 is +1. I should change this inequality, so I'm going to get greater than or equal to 1 negative cosine of x, and change this because we are multiplying by a negative number, greater than or equal to 1 times -1 is -1. Again, I multiplied all these values by -1. -1 times -1 is 1. Cosine of x times -1 is negative cosine of x. 1 times -1 is -1. And we just change these inequalities. We have to, because we are multiplying by a negative number. Alright, so I have to rewrite this expression, because in inequalities we write always in this order: smaller than, or smaller than or equal to, and smaller than or equal to. Okay, we should write in this order. So I have to write -1 less than or equal to negative cosine of x, and it is less than or equal to 1. Right? These are exact same things. These are exact same things. Alright, so I got negative cosine of x. So Now I need to get 1 minus cosine of x. How can I do that? I can add 1 to all the sides, all these values. I can add 1. So let me write plus 1 and plus 1 and plus 1. So I'm going to get, let me continue here, I'm going to get 1 minus 1 is 0, less than or equal to, I will get 1 minus cosine of x, 1 minus cosine of x, less than or equal to 1 plus 1 is 2. I will get 2. And I got 1 minus cosine of x. Now I have to divide by 3 because I want to get 1 minus cosine of x divided by 3. So if I divide all these sides by 3, divide by 3. So if you divide by a positive number, the inequality does not change. Alright, so I'll get 0 over 3 is 0, less than or equal to 1 minus cosine of x over 3, 1 minus cosine of x over 3, less than or equal to 2 over 3. Alright, that's it. This is our minimum value and this is our maximum value. This function gets its minimum value at 0. So let's write minimum is 0 and maximum is 2 over 3.